Alrighty, we are back with Catalyst by Lisa Beeson. Chapter 17. Here we go. That night, Ari found herself caught in a cycle of fitful sleep, fraught with alternating nightmares of having to watch her loved ones suffer horrible deaths while being trapped inside a glass bubble and being trapped in the pitch-black room with an ominous presence. She was jolted awake by the sense of someone skulking around her room. She sat up, tensing for an attack, only to see that it was the twins huddled on the end of her bed, staring at her with wide, startled eyes. Their eyeliner was smudged, giving them a sickly, ghoulish look, echoing the fears of her nightmares. "Oh, jeez! You guys scared the crap out of me!" Ari breathed out, running her hand through her disheveled hair. Her heart rate was slowly beginning to calm down. "I thought we talked about not sneaking into my room at night." She looked up at her clock on the bureau to see that it was 4:06 in the morning. Only a couple hours until surgery. "Were you having a bad dream too? You were mumbling the word no a lot," Skylar whispered, then absently started wiggling one of her front teeth that had apparently become loose recently. Ari nodded and then looked at them curiously. "Too? You both had bad dreams?" Skylar nodded solemnly, and Soren's eyes began to tear up. "Oh, come here," Ari said, beckoning them closer. They both scrambled over to her, and she brought them into a hug. "We don't mean to be bad," Soren whispered. "What are you talking about? You guys aren't bad. Why would you think that?" Ari asked. The twins pulled away and sat back with their heads hanging in shame. "You said we could talk to you if something was bothering us," Skylar said. "Well, the reason we've been sneaking up to the roof was so that we could steal some plants for Val. She said George wouldn't miss them, and..." She looked over at Soren, who nodded to her resolutely, determined to confess everything. "And we knew it was wrong to steal, but we did it anyways because she promised us candy if we do it. So we did." "What plants did you take?" "We don't know what it's called, but it's kind of scrubby looking, and its leaves have 5 points like this," she said, holding up her hand and spreading her fingers out as wide as she could. Holy crap. Val had them steal pot for her? What in the world was she thinking? At her shocked expression, Soren's eyes began to overflow with tears. "It's a bad plant, isn't it?" he said. "It's what made her sick, isn't it?" "Oh, little man," Ari said, bringing him into her lap and hugging him close. "The plant you guys took is called marijuana. In most places, it's considered illegal to smoke it. Val really shouldn't have asked you guys to steal it, but it wasn't what made her sick, I promise." They both nodded, visibly relieved that what happened to Val wasn't their fault, but she could still sense that they were troubled. "Do you guys want to tell me about your bad dreams? Sometimes talking about them makes them seem less scary." "Like my bad dream was about being stuck in a bubble," she said, downplaying the rest of it. "It was scary at the time, but now that I say it out loud, it sounds kind of silly, right?" They both smiled and nodded, but then Skylar's face became serious again. "Our bad dream is always the same," she said timidly, looking to Soren to see if he minded if she told. He nodded again to tell her that it was okay with it, so she pressed on. "We're little again, and Mommy and Daddy are scared because the men in black armor with guns are yelling and breaking into our home. Soren and I run into our closet, and he seals the door shut so they can't get us. We hold each other tight while they try to get in, and we can hear Mommy and Daddy yelling at us not to tell them anything as the men take them away." "Oh, well, Ari was taken aback. She was expecting monsters under the bed or something, not a real-life trauma. "That's a bit..." Or that's a bit more intense than the bubble thing. I'll give you that, she said as she brought Skylar in close, surprised that their twin connection allowed them to have the same dream at the same time. But you guys know the men in black armor were just policemen doing their jobs. They weren't there to hurt you. Soren nodded. Grandma Mara said that they came because Mommy and Daddy made bad choices and told us to do bad things. Grandma Mara doesn't like us very much. I wish she wasn't coming tomorrow, he said glumly. I'm sure she likes you guys, Ari said, trying to console them. Skylar shook her head. No, she doesn't. Soren can't feel Grandma Mara's feelings like with everyone else, but Mommy told us so. Your mom told you that your grandma doesn't like you? Ari asked, outraged. They both nodded. She said it's 'cause Daddy is our daddy, and she really doesn't like him, Skylar explained. Mommy and Daddy didn't like us much either until they found out what we could do, said Soren. Mommy said that we were horrible babies because we cried all the time. But I think we only cry because Soren could feel what people are feeling, and I feel what he's feeling, and we could feel that Daddy didn't like us. Mommy is blocked off like the other Reinholds, but she was always so grumpy. She must have not liked us very much either. But then they started telling us to do things, like opening locked doors for them, and sneaking into places, and taking stuff without anyone seeing. It made them happy, so we did it. Ari tried to let go of the anger she had for their parents and hugged the twins tighter. They deserved so much better. She turned them to face her. It was your parents who were wrong, not you. You guys were too young to know any better, she said, but she could see they still felt guilty about it. But you know better now, right? They both nodded. Believe me, everybody has things they regret. The only thing we can do to move on is make amends for our mistakes and learn from them, she said, remembering what Enzo had told her about accountability and never making the same mistake twice. What does make amends mean? Skylar asked before beginning to wiggle her tooth again. It means to apologize or to make things right after you did something wrong. How do we do that? Soren asked. Well, you can apologize to George for taking his plants and promise him that you'll never do it again, she suggested. She could tell they didn't want to do that at all, but they nodded that they would, and it made her proud. And from now on, you both could start listening to that little feeling in your heart that lets you know if what you're doing is right or wrong. Like how Pinocchio was supposed to listen to Jiminy Cricket? Skylar asked. Yes, just like that, Ari said. Pinocchio had a rough time when he didn't listen to Jiminy, didn't he? They both nodded their heads. And you guys didn't feel right about taking those plants from George without asking, did you? They both shook their heads. I know that sometimes saying no to someone or turning down something you want can be really hard, but at those times you have to be very brave and choose to do what's right. If you learn to trust the voice in your heart, it will never steer you wrong. She looked at both of them in their eyes and connected to their energies, letting them feel the truth of her words. And I know for a fact that you two are good kids with very good hearts, she said, smiling. I'm thankful every day that you two are in my life. They were both practically glowing with her praise, and they went in to give her a bone-crushing hug, Soren going high and wrapping his arms around her neck, and Skylar went lower, wrapping her arms around her ribs. I'm so glad you came here, Ari. I love you so much, Soren whispered, and she could feel that he meant it wholeheartedly. Me too, Skylar said, and she meant it just as much as her brother. And for a moment, everything else disappeared as Ari was enveloped in the love of these two amazing little kids, whom she now claimed as family. I love you too, she said sincerely, and then kissed them both on the head. Can we stay with you for the rest of the night? Soren asked in a pitiful, barely audible whisper. Please? Skylar pleaded. Sure, I guess so, Ari said, laying back down, unable to deny them the small comfort. But I'm kicking you out if you start snoring, she teased. They both giggled and laid down on either side of her, snuggling in close. Ari was thankful that if Maren had heard them talking, she had chosen to let it slide. And within minutes, all three of them had nodded off and were sleeping peacefully. Val couldn't sleep. She hadn't been able to have a peaceful sleep since the night she was drugged. Every time she closed her eyes, she felt the darkness closing in on her, and the oily iciness start to invade her limbs. Then the phantom echoing sounds of gunshots and screeches would invoke a full-blown panic attack that took forever to calm down from. So she stayed awake as long as physically possible, until she'd finally pass out from sheer exhaustion for an hour or so at a time. After Gordon's interrogation, Val couldn't stand to be around anyone with their hushed conversations and condemning stares. She spent her days venting her anger with intense drum sessions in her chill-out room, stopping only to suck down coffee and George's smoothie drinks. She spent her nights alternating between watching recordings of Broadway musicals, which had always been an escape for her, and searching the internet for answers. Whatever you do, don't chew on that blanket. I will be so mad. One moment. Answers to what? She really didn't know. She couldn't for the life of her remember exactly what happened after she started dancing with Liam and Shauna in the bar that night. It was all just one big blur of confusing insanity made up of giants, demons, darkness, and gunshots. She kept coming back to a news article she found about 2 bodies that had been discovered shot dead in an old apartment building in the midst of a renovation, about a block away from the bar on the same night the band had played. One of the bodies was identified as Jenna Duchamp, who'd been reported missing by her roommate a couple of months ago. Hey, chill out. No growling. Chill out. There was a picture of Jenna, and she looked somewhat familiar, but why did Val have the feeling that her name should be Susie? The second body was identified as Hunter Corbett. Her blood had felt like ice in her veins when she saw that name, and his picture staring back at her the first time she read the article. He looked so much healthier in the picture than he had that night. She'd never really cared for the guy. She still couldn't believe he was really dead. The article said that the police thought that it had been a drug deal gone wrong, but due to lack of evidence at the crime scene, they had no idea who the killer was. Both bodies had only been shot once, but each shot was aimed perfectly. Jenna had been hit directly in the heart, and Hunter had been right between the eyes. Whoever the killer was had been a skilled marksman. There had been traces of blood from a possible third victim, but they haven't been able to identify who that person was yet. For some reason, it felt wrong to call Hunter and Jenna the victims, and the shooter a cold-blooded killer. The whole thing felt wrong. What really happened that night? Boys. It was all so frustrating, and she was so exhausted. But the worst part was that she was constantly craving more of that drug cocktail that had been slapped on the back of her neck. Logically, she knew that that was the absolute last thing she should be wanting, but she couldn't help the constant need she felt, like an annoying, persistent itch she couldn't scratch, and it made her miserable. Val knew that she should talk to Maren or Azza about it. They couldn't do anything to help her. She didn't want to see the judgment in their eyes. Ari's invitation to talk was always in the back of her mind, though, like a beautiful, shining promise of salvation. Ari was the only person that had been able to bring Val any kind of peace or joy. But since that Red Death virus thing started going around, Ari was always busy with the science squad. Even if she wasn't, Val couldn't allow herself to become that vulnerable just to have the rug pulled out from under her again. She wouldn't be able to come back from that. It would break her beyond repair. It would be safer for her to ignore the tall, beautiful, scarred girl and her promised redemption, no matter how hard it would be. The only thing Val could do to get any kind of relief was leave this place once and for all. There was nothing for her here anymore. If the media was to be believed, the Red Death virus was going to wipe everyone out sooner or later anyway. And now that she thought about it, that was probably why Hunter had looked so sick that night. He was probably already infected, which meant she was probably infected too. The best thing she could do for these people would be to leave. She'd see if she could crash at Liam's while she tried to find more of that Mad Hatter drug, and then ride out the apocalypse in a euphoric, hallucinogenic haze. And with that decided, she started making preparations. That was the very short chapter 17. 18, I believe, is going to be much longer. Let me see here. Oh, no. I keep thinking we're already into the surgery, but, I mean, we are, but not like how I recollected. 18's a short one, so we're just going to go right into 18. Whoop, whoop. Haven't done that in a while, a twofer. Chapter 18. They had moved one of the infirmary's hospital beds into the lab for the procedure, creating a temporary operating room, with everyone wearing scrubs, latex gloves, and surgical masks to be safe. Ari was allowed to skip the hospital gown and wear a comfortable t-shirt and shorts instead, which she was grateful for. Hospital gowns made her uncomfortable. She was also glad she hadn't eaten anything in the past 12 hours, because her stomach felt like it was twisted up in knots of nervousness and anticipation. Miles and Joshua were busy preparing the nanomites for insertion, while Azza and Claudia were preparing for the surgery. Cam was lounging in a chair by the bed with his mask on top of his head, watching Claudia hook Ari up to the various machines monitoring her vitals, while Ari watched Azza methodically prepping all his surgical equipment. Noticing her keen attention, Azza held up one of the screws for her to see. "The biomedical screws are coated with porous titanium," he explained, "which allows for greater osseous integration, creating a stable connection between the screw and the bone. I'll be able to help speed up the healing process, so there will be minimal to no pain after you wake up from the sedation." "I'm going to be sedated?" She had thought that wouldn't be necessary with Azza's ability. Azza nodded. "I'll only be able to concentrate on healing you after I'm done with the procedure. It'll be less traumatic this way," he assured her. "It'll be fine, Pipes," Cam said. "I'll be right here the whole time to make sure he does it right." "Thanks, Cam," Ari said with a sarcastic smirk, but she was glad he was there. "We're ready when you are, Azza," Miles called over from where they were prepping the nanomites. "All right, here we go," Azza said as he came over with the sedative. Claudia placed the oxygen tubes into Ari's nose and around her ears as Azza injected the sedative into her IV. Cam put his surgical mask over his face and then took her hand between his. "Keep your eyes on my beautiful face, Pipes," he said, and she could hear Claudia starting to emit her soothing frequencies behind her. The sedative quickly made its way through her veins, making everything fuzzy around the edges. And just as her eyelids became too heavy to keep open, Cam whispered, "See you on the other side." Cam watched as Ari eased into a drug-induced sleep while he continued to hold her hand. When Azza was sure she was out of it, he nodded to Claudia, and they both got out some restraints and began tying them around Ari's chest, wrists, waist, and left ankle to the bed. "Whoa, hey!" Cam objected. "What's all this about?" "It's for her own protection, Cam," Azza said. Joshua came over with a syringe full of silverish goop. The nanomites are programmed to seek out and detach the nerves in her leg, he said, handing the syringe over to Aza. Essentially, they'll make their way through the myelin sheaths that protect the nerve fibers and hijack the neural signals coming down through the spinal cord and the reflexive nerves in her muscles. And while they're calibrating the signals, she might endure some reflexive tremors. Might? You guys don't know? Cam asked, looking at them all accusingly. This is the first time this has been tried, Cam. We're just preparing for all the possible kinks in the system, Miles said. But between Aza monitoring her and me monitoring the mites, everything should work out fine. Aza flicked the syringe a couple times to get rid of the air bubbles, and then he nodded to Claudia, who then put a tongue depressor in between Ari's teeth and held it there. Cam held onto Ari's hand tighter and kissed her scarred knuckles. Transit umra elu perstat, he thought like a prayer, as I stuck the needle into the stump of her right leg, making sure every last drop of the silverish goop was injected into her, and then stepped back. Nothing happened at first, and they all looked at each other in intense anticipation. Then suddenly a tremor passed through Ari's body, which quickly turned into full-body convulsions. The heart rate monitor was signaling that her pulse had risen exponentially. Her hand muscles reflexively clutched around Cam's, almost cutting off his circulation. He clenched his teeth to hold in a yelp of pain. The restraints did their job of keeping her from hurting herself, as her body bucked and jerked aggressively. But then Cam felt a strong pulse of static energy come from her that amped his sight more than she had ever before. Everything was crystal clear to the point where he could see individual dust motes circulating in the air, and the walls were alternating between opacity and transparency depending on how he looked at them. He could even see Maya and George working on something in their walled-off section of the lab. He also noticed a subtle glow around everyone, which reminded him of when he'd seen the image of Ari's brother and sister that she accidentally pushed into his mind back at Ardamir. Every living thing around him was incredibly vibrant and glowing in impossible colors. It was mesmerizingly beautiful. Claudia started emitting a sound that moved through him like the music Ari made, creating a soothingly calm atmosphere, and Cam could actually see the frequency waves coming off of her and filling the room. You better not mess up that blanket. Are you getting comfortable or doing something you shouldn't be doing? Because I'm about to snatch that blanket away. Okay. He looked down at his hand and saw the glowing energy around it was being absorbed into Ari's non-glowing hand. Ooh, weird. How's that even happening? It was strange to see the person who should have the brightest glow have none at all. He looked over at Aza, who had closed his eyes and had his hands on Ari's leg. He saw Aza's energy flare and flow out to cover her, as though he was searching for something. Conversely, Joshua's eyes were wide open, and his hands were twitching like he couldn't wait to start building the ideas that seemed to be flooding into his mind. Cam looked back over at his father and saw that he had turned from the display screen of his monitor and was looking intently at Ari's leg as though he was telepathically communicating with the nanomites, helping them with the calibrations. Then, as suddenly as it started, the convulsions stopped. Her body stilled, and his sight abruptly became normal once more. Miles turned back to the display screen and nodded. The mites are calibrated. Go ahead, Aza. Joshua came over with the prosthetic and immediately went back over to his workstation to start manically drafting out the ideas that had come to him while he was amped. Claudia took the tongue depressor out of Ari's mouth, then came over to assist Aza. First, she applied iodine all around the end of Ari's right leg. Then she went to stand by the table with the surgical instruments, ready to hand them to Aza when he needed it. Cam watched her appreciatively as she performed her duties methodically and professionally. He just couldn't get over how even in surgical scrubs she was able to look so incredibly hot. Sensing his gaze on her, Claudia glanced at him and smiled behind her surgical mask before going back to concentrating on her job. Asa held out his hand for the scalpel, and Cam had to turn back towards Ari's face. He couldn't handle seeing her blood without flashing back to that night in New York when he'd almost lost her. He decided to concentrate on trying to give her more of his energy, like he'd seen himself do a moment ago, hoping it would help strengthen her. "You're going to be just fine, Pipes. I'm right here, no matter what." Ari was floating in a numb oblivion, when her mind was taken over by another memory. Little Senna awoke in an unfamiliar room. She'd been in the in-between for such a long time, even after her father had left to return back to his real life. It left her feeling disoriented. Her heart quickened when she remembered that the last thing she had done was try to protect her and Brannon. She quickly searched the room, and thankfully he was sleeping soundly on a lounging couch on the other side of the room, and her heartbeat calmed. He was all right. She had saved them. But where were they now? She noticed that she was wearing clean clothes, no longer covered in dirt and grime from the desert, and she had been bathed. Now that she was fully awake, she felt strong and rejuvenated. Quietly getting out of bed and careful not to disturb her uncle's slumber, she decided to explore their new surroundings and cautiously exited the room. She was relieved to feel no discord in this place. On the contrary, she felt a joyful welcoming. She silently strolling through the white stone corridors lit by its own ambient glow, she noticed a stairwell leading up to a higher level. Standing at the bottom, she looked up to see the room above lit by millions of projected stars. Senna knew the projected universe was coming from an astrocularis. The sages let her use one for her studies. She always loved working with the projections, pretending she was navigating through space to places undiscovered in the universe. Curious, she began to climb the glowing stairs, and she felt the presence of someone strangely familiar to her. Didn't feel like anyone she actually knew, just a familiar recognition. Entering the room, she saw that the astrocularis was projecting a quadrant she'd never seen before. It wasn't anywhere in the Anu galaxy. Slowly turning to take it all in, she noticed the bearded old man sitting in the corner. Judging by his incredibly bright shaza and his distinctive silver eyes, she figured that he must be the Shazaman. "Hello, little one," the ancient man said in her mother's dialect, with a loving and welcoming smile on his face. Her heart pulsed with a brief flare of joy at seeing him, which quickly dissipated into confusion. It was so strange. She'd never seen this man before, but she felt like she recognized his presence. He was important. It was like in dreams, when you know for certain that it is someone you know, but they look differently than they should. "You're so old," she mused aloud before she could stop herself. But he really was the oldest being she had ever seen. The Shazaman chuckled as he stood up from his chair and came towards her through the projections of the astrocularis. Uh-oh. Sorry for the interruption. The dogs outside were going off. "Yes, I am very old. I have held on to this life longer than the others of my order to fulfill a promise I made to someone long ago." She didn't know much about the Shazaman order, only that longevity was part of what made them what they are. Scholars, guardians, and watchers. Hey! Cut it out. And get off of him. Go. If he was older than them, then that meant he must be incredibly ancient. "What happens when you fulfill your promise?" Senna asked curiously. He smiled fondly down at her. "That remains to be seen. but I'll make sure that you will be the first to know. The Shazaman considered her as he knelt down in front of her. You are very small for your age, he observed. Senna had always been tiny, and she was used to beings mistaking her for being younger than she really was. The sages say that my small stature is due to the amount of energy my body has to constantly regulate because of the abilities I've exhibited since my birth. They say that once I'm close to maturity, my growth should rectify itself and I will eventually grow to be around the same height as my parents, she told the Shazaman, quoting Hai Seigemin practically word for word. Everyone knew that he was only guessing since her existence was unprecedented, but she hoped it was true. At the thought of the sages and her parents, Senna's heart sank and she hung her head to hide her tears. The Shazaman gently raised her chin with his hands so she would look at him, and she saw love and understanding in his mysterious eyes. Courage, little one. Your mother is still alive. Really? She asked, hope rising in her chest. How do you know? He only smiled, and she had the feeling that he knew many things, but he wasn't going to tell them to her until he decided to. She and your uncle are in the custody of the Anukanai Judicial Synod. Your grandmother and grandfather are working very hard on exonerating them from the charges against them as we speak. Senna had never met her mother's parents, but she knew that her grandmother was the Majira of Greater Emuria, and her grandfather was the Daisen consul in Esseret. If anyone could help her mother and uncle, it would be them. Some of the pain in her chest subsided. Malu was alive. The Shazaman looked at her curiously. Do you know of your father's family? Not much, sir, she said. Only that his mother died after she gave birth to him in a mountain cave, and he was taken in by an Oruk herdsman who raised him as his own. You know nothing of your father's father? No, sir, she said. The Shazaman stood up and started manipulating the astrocularis to focus in on an unfamiliar star system. Your grandfather was wrongfully accused of a heinous crime and was taken to a faraway planet as punishment. Senna watched his course carefully as he swiftly moved through the cosmos and focused in on a singular planet. It used to be an old trading outpost that the Anukanai named Gaia. That's Gaia? Senna burst out incredulously, reaching towards the blue, green, and white orb suspended above her. The perspective of the map changed, and the planet was now spinning directly in front of her. This is where the Gaian slaves that she's supposed to be disguised as came from. It is so beautiful. Why did the Anukanai abandon it? It was managed very poorly by the colonists, he answered patiently, even though she had been rude and interrupted him. So my grandfather lives among the Gaians? She asked as she continued examining the rotating planet, wondering on which landmass he could possibly be. Uncle Ranan says that they age their entire lives as fast as a child, and that they're all hopelessly ignorant, almost like animals. That's why he said I should always keep my head down and be silent when we're in public. That might be true for some of the Gaians of an Anu, but I've observed that beings usually conform to the way they're treated. Treat someone like an ignorant animal long enough, and they'll act like an ignorant animal, the Shazaman replied. The memory suddenly faded away as Arya began to gain consciousness. And that was the end of chapter 18. So 17 and 18. And sounds like she's waking up from surgery now. So join us for chapter 19 to see how that goes. How Ari with her new robotic leg goes. and everything else that's going on. Okay. Fare thee well. Thank you for joining us for Chapter 17 and Chapter 18 of Catalyst by Lisa Beeson. Peace.